So, good evening, everyone. Surprise. You'll see in front of you not Dr. Martin Verhoeven. You have my name is Jing Chuan. I'm going to make sure everything works out here, okay? And Marty was feeling a little bit ill tonight and asked if I could help fill in for today's sutra lecture. So I was reflecting a little bit on what would be worth sharing with everyone, and I thought something that is very close to my heart and I feel is kind of the essence of the Avatamsaka Sutra is shared in the 9th vow of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, the vow to constantly accord with living beings. So we'll maybe investigate a little bit of that tonight. And also another passage from the Mencius that I think really illustrates this principle. I had a chance to study this at the RBU, and so, the Mencius really came alive in the shared inquiry with a group of colleagues and students. So just to begin the sutra lecture, I invite everyone, if you wish, to maybe put your palms together. We'll just do the invocation for the triple jewel and also the verse for opening the sutra. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Namo sadanto sucedoye alahadi samyao samputoche. Supreme and wondrous Dharma, subtle and profound, rarely is encountered, even in billions of eons. Now we see and hear it and accept it reverently. May we truly understand the Buddha's actual meaning. So good evening again. As I've just said, we were going to investigate Samantabhadra Bodhisattva's 9th vow. And this comes from the very end of the Avatamsaka Sutra. I don't know if people kind of know the overall structure of the text, but in the beginning, there's from chapter 1 to chapter 38, they usually say that is the kind of theory of the text of the Avatamsaka Sutra. And so Marty last week and actually all the previous weeks has been going over the chapter on, he's been calling it luminous awakening. And sometimes they say this is theory. This is the kind of principles. And then chapter 39 and chapter 40 is the actual application of the practice. And this application is described in a story, in a kind of epic journey of a young man named Sudhana who goes and meets many good and wise teachers, beginning with Manjushri Bodhisattva. And at the very end of his journey, he meets Samantabhadra Bodhisattva. And each time the youth Sudhana meets a teacher, he asks the teacher, how does one cultivate the Bodhisattva path? And the teachers ask him, have you made the Bodhi resolve? Have you really set your intention on helping all living beings wake up? And the youth Sudhana says, yes, I have done so. And after the teacher sees the youth Sudhana's sincerity, he or she gives the teachings to this young man. And so you could say this is the kind of culmination of the sutra. We've gone through all the various portions, and now we're very near the end. And in the ninth vow of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, he teaches Sudhana how to accord with all living beings. I think it's quite apt because I know that one of the men in our residential retreat here actually, in his heart, made the vow for this time to actually accord with all living beings. So tonight I thought, let's really investigate, what does it really mean to accord with living beings? Reading Samantabhadra Bodhisattva's instructions to Sudhana. So I don't know if you can put up the text. Yeah. So again, just for a little bit of context, the youth Sudhana has journeyed to many places. He has gone from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher, and finally he's before Samantabhadra Bodhisattva asking how to walk this path. And Samantabhadra Bodhisattva begins by actually saying to him, I go to the very beginning here. He says, good men, even if all the Buddhas of the 10 directions spoke continuously of the Tathagata's merit and virtue for eons, as many as the fine particles of dust in inexpressible, ineffable many Buddha lands, those virtues could not be fully described. People who wish to master these teachings on merit and virtue should cultivate 10 vast and great practices and vows. So what are these? They are, first, to worship and respect all Buddhas. Second, to make praises to the Tathagatas. Third, to practice profoundly the giving of offerings. Fourth, to repent and reform all karmic hindrances. Fifth, to joyously support all merit and virtue. Sixth, to request the turning of the Dharma wheel. Seventh, request that the Buddhas remain in the world. Eighth, to always follow the Buddha's teachings. Ninth, to constantly accord with all living beings. And 10th, to transfer all merit and virtue universally. So after Samantabhadra Bodhisattva says this to Sudhana, Sudhana asks this question. He says, great sage, what does it mean to worship and respect all Buddhas, up to and including to transfer all merit and virtue universally? So I think here we want to put ourselves actually in the sutra text. I think it makes it a lot more alive. So rather than thinking of this text as kind of out there, I say let's imagine ourselves as youth Sudhana, asking Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, how do I really cultivate? And of course, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva can ask us, so have we really made the vow for full awakening, to truly wake up? And that's a good question, because we start thinking, really, what am I about in this life? What am I doing with myself? Is it just trying to get through the day? Pay the bills, raise the kids, call my parents, just find some time to hang out with my friends, watch YouTube. And what are we doing with our lives? What is my deepest intention? And here Samantabhadra Bodhisattva says, is to truly wake up. Truly wake up. And so we can just reflect, even just right now, to say, really, what if I were to make that my life purpose? To truly wake up. What would my priorities be in my life? What would I be paying attention to? And here Samantabhadra Bodhisattva tells Sudhana, here's where to look. These 10 practices. And these 10, you could say, form the backbone, the kind of framework for the monastic practice in our tradition. We begin the day with bowing to the Buddhas, praising the Buddhas, making offerings, repenting, all the way to dedicating merit at the end of the day. Actually, at the end of every practice, we dedicate merit. Or maybe you could say we dedicate merit all the time. Hopefully right now, maybe you're dedicating merit, right? You're listening to the sutra and you may be thinking, I hope that when I study the sutra together, I can be a better son. I can be of better service to my parents and really take care of them. Or maybe I wish I could help my children learn kindness and compassion. Or maybe I can learn how to be a better Dharma friend to those around me. Right? So right here, right now, we're dedicating merit as we're learning the sutra together. But what I really wanted to focus on is this 9th vow of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, of according with all living beings, because I think it's actually an important vow to understand. And so I'm going to ask maybe to go to on page 17, the 9th practice and vow. And again, I want to say, if we can just imagine ourselves as Sudhana, having made this Bodhi resolve to say, I want to really rescue all living beings, wake up to the Buddha's wisdom, and be of real service. And now I want to know how to do it. And Samantabhadra Bodhisattva is telling me. So here's Samantabhadra Bodhisattva's instructions on how do we accord with living beings. Samantabhadra Bodhisattva says, good man, I'll tell you about constantly according with all living beings. Throughout oceans of Buddha lands in the 10 directions, to the ends of the Dharma realm and the realm of space, there are many kinds of living beings. That is to say, those born from eggs, womb-born, moisture-born, transformational-born, and beings who live in different elements, depending on earth, water, fire, and air. Some soar in space, others cling to plants, and some perch in forests. This includes all the many species and races with their diverse bodies, shapes, faces, lifespans, family names, and natures. This includes their many varieties of knowledges and outlooks, their various wishes and joys, their thoughts and deeds, and their many different manners, costumes, and diets. It includes beings who dwell in villages, towns, cities, and palaces, as well as gods, dragons, and others of the eightfold pantheon, humans and non-humans alike. Also, there are footless beings, beings with 2 feet, 4 feet, and many feet. There are beings with form and without form, with thought and without thought, and those neither entirely with thought nor entirely without thought. Okay, maybe I'll just stop there just to get the kind of starting point here. Last week, Marty talked about all these different species and how oftentimes as a human race we're very centric is the word, right? We think humans are the most important species and we just kind of focus on ourselves and we have this kind of speciesism. And what I find very inspiring about the sutras, about the Buddha's teachings, is that he doesn't focus on humans in that way. Rather, the Buddha teaches we're here in service to all living beings, not just humans, right? Not just to our own clan, our own race, but to all living beings. And so Samantabhadra Bodhisattva begins his instructions to Sudhana to first help him really reflect on all of these different kinds of living beings. And perhaps we're not so accomplished that we can maybe connect with those born from eggs. Although Reverend Sure in in Gold Coast, if people have been watching his lectures, has all the birds, the lorikeets, the parrots, the turkeys come by, and then the cockatoo, I think, comes by, and he feeds them, and he, recites for them. And so you can say Reverend Sure really accords with the living beings born from eggs. But perhaps maybe we don't have that many living beings born from eggs in our life. Womb born, that's us. Human beings are born from wombs. Moisture born, and so on and so forth. But there's a long list here, and it is worthwhile just to reflect on each of those categories to say, what are the living beings who live in that realm, and how can I truly serve them? But just for today, I would ask you just to reflect on maybe somebody you care about. Maybe it's your parents or your children. Maybe it's a friend. Or if you want to be a little bit more, I would say, challenging, I would say try to pick somebody who comes from a different culture. Today, in the monastery, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the spiritual aspirations of those coming from a kind of more of a Western upbringing, kind of an English education, and those who maybe come from a more Asian background. Of course, it's not locked in stone, but oftentimes because we grow up in, as it says here, in different places, maybe a village or a town or a city or a palace or a different culture or a different continent, we have different types of food, different types of clothing, different ways of showing respect. Like in America here, oftentimes children might address their parents by their first name, and students address their professors by their first name. Like for instance, Marty. Like if I was in an Asian context, I would not call Marty Marty. I'd call him Dr. Verhoeven. But Marty prefers being called Marty, being an American. But I think in Asia, you probably don't have too many professors saying, call me by my first name. Usually it's Momo Jiao, right? Momo Jiao. And so, different way of showing respect, different culture. So I said, you can think maybe, who's somebody who's from a different culture in your life? Because let's use this as an example of how do you accord with living beings. Okay, so that's that first section. I'd say that's just as a kind of an exercise. Now next section, page 18. What does Samantabhadra Bodhisattva say to Sudhana? He says, I will accord with and take care of all these many kinds of beings, providing them all manner of services and offerings. I will treat them with the same respect I show my parents, teachers, elders, arhats, and even tathagatas, serving them all equally without any differences. I will be a good doctor for the sick and suffering. I will lead those who have lost their way to the right road. I will be a bright light for those in the dark night. I will lead the poor and destitute to discover hidden treasures. The Bodhisattva impartially benefits all beings in these ways. And he says, why is this? I think here is a very interesting reflection. So you can just imagine that person. If it's a parent, if it's a friend, if it's a colleague, and just think, now what if I were to treat them like the Buddha and serve them like the Buddha? To really care for them, what would that be like? Right? Would I judge them? Say somehow, you don't match my expectations on how I think things are supposed to be. Right? Would we do that? How would we treat somebody with so much respect like we would treat the Buddha? I think we'd listen very, very carefully. We'd observe them with a heart of loving kindness, wanting to be of service, seeing what's their deepest aspirations so that we can show up in their life without causing affliction, causing harm, but really bringing happiness and well-being. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to do that, especially for somebody who maybe comes from a different culture, because it requires us to really pay attention to what do they truly value, not just what I think is correct or what I think is how things are supposed to be done. So this is actually very interesting. This is first move is to say, let's just remove all culture, let's remove all my own kind of attachments, and just come from this pure heart of service for their Buddha nature, for their ultimate well-being. And that's not easy. I'll be real honest, that's not easy. It's why it's a practice to really be able to accord. And he says, why is this? All right, so why do we do this? Is it because we just want to cause ourselves a lot of suffering and a lot of trouble? Because helping living beings is, not easy. Is not easy. And the sutra goes on. Samantabhadra Bodhisattva goes on. He says, if a bodhisattva accords with living beings, then he accords with and makes offerings to all Buddhas. If he can honor and serve living beings, then he honors and serves the Tathagatas. If he makes living beings happy, then he is making all Tathagatas happy. And why is this? Okay, so I'll just stop there again. And I think another interesting reflection now is to say, why do I serve living beings? It's because when I serve living beings, it's actually just like serving the Buddha. And this is what really makes the Buddha happy. The Buddha is not so interested, although of course he's happy that we make offerings to the Buddha and help him and support him and serve him. But what really makes him happy, you could say here, it says is when living beings help each other get free of suffering. Right? That's what the Buddha wants. That's what the Buddha's, you could say, job is. When we say every morning and every evening, we renounce our lives to do the Buddha's work in the ceremonies, the Buddha hopes that we can do that work of the Buddha, which is to help living beings. So that would make the living beings, the Buddha, happy. And then the sutra goes on to explain even deeper. He says, because the heart of great compassion is the essence of all Buddhas, Tathagatas. Because of living beings, great compassion comes forth. From great compassion, the Bodhi mind is born. And because of their Bodhi mind, Buddhas accomplish equal and proper enlightenment. So right here is like a very interesting reflection, is what is the essence of the Buddhas? It's this heart of great compassion. And where does this great compassion come from? It comes from caring for living beings, according with living beings. And from that great compassion, we can make the Bodhi resolve. And because we make the Bodhi resolve, we can wake up. So later you'll say that it's because of living beings that we can wake up. It's through the gratitude to living beings to allow us to be of service, that we have a heart of compassion that allows us to wake up. I'll read the rest of it, and then you'll see how this works out. So next is a very beautiful image. The sutra goes on. It is like a great king of trees growing amid the rocks and sands of a barren wilderness. When the roots get water, the branches and leaves flourish. The flowers and fruits are abundant. The regal Bodhi tree, growing in the wilderness of birth and death, is the same. all living beings are its roots. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are its flowers and fruits. By benefiting all living beings with the water of great compassion, one can realize the flowers and fruits of the Buddha's and Bodhisattva's wisdom. Why is this? If Bodhisattvas benefit all beings with the water of great compassion, they can obtain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Here's a line. Therefore, Bodhi belongs to the living beings. If there were no living beings, Bodhisattvas could not achieve unsurpassed proper enlightenment. Good man, you should understand these truths in this way. When one's mind is impartial towards all living beings, one can accomplish full and perfect great compassion. By using the heart of great compassion to accord with living beings, one can bring to perfection the practices of making offerings to the Tathagatas. In these ways, the Bodhisattva constantly accords with living beings. Even if the realm of space comes to an end, if the realm of beings comes to an end, if their karma and their afflictions come to an end, I will still accord endlessly and continuously, in thought after thought without cease. My body, mouth, and mind never weary of these deeds. So I think what is so beautiful or powerful in this kind of metaphor that the Buddha gives, this image the Buddha gives about this tree in the wilderness, is that we see the whole picture, from roots to trunk to branches to fruits. Sometimes we just focus on the fruits. I want to get enlightened. I want to get free. I don't want to suffer. And we don't see that those fruits come from deep roots. And if we start to cultivate the Dharma, we realize we don't need to worry about the fruits. If we attend to the roots, because we trust in cause and effect in the Buddha's teachings, we know we plant the seeds, the fruits will come. But if we try to grab the fruits and don't plant the seeds, then in the end we don't have anything. And so Samantabhadra Bodhisattva is teaching Sudhana, attend to the roots, according with living beings, is really where you could say, the work is. If you work there, you will realize Buddhahood. And of course, what happens when we see living beings? Living beings are suffering. Right now in the world, we can say there's the pandemic, there's the climate change, there's a drought here in California. And living beings living in kind of our families, oftentimes there's strife. Parents not talking to each other, children kind of, or parents even, just kind of, I don't want to ever talk to you again, and just kind of cutting each other out of their lives. Or sometimes, for ourselves, we just feel very lonely and isolated and lost. So living beings, we could say, we really suffer. A lot of difficulty, have a lot of afflictions. And so because of this recognition, what's the skillful response? Is not to dwell in the suffering and just kind of go, I suffer so much, and just kind of mope and get depressed and just kind of wallow in the suffering. Is that if we have this Bodhi resolve, that's why this Bodhi resolve is so important. Because if we have this Bodhi resolve to really help living beings wake up, then when we see the suffering of living beings, we don't get overwhelmed. What happens is our heart has great compassion because we want to help. And this spirit of great compassion is actually very empowering. When we have this great compassion, then we can begin to really do the Buddha's work in helping living beings by serving them, by supporting them. And from that process, we actually can realize Buddhahood. And I won't go too much more because of time, and I want to get to the Mencius section that I thought is actually quite interesting in terms of according with living beings, is that the very last part of this section, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva gives a teaching to use Sudhana that I find to be actually very helpful for our moment-to-moment practice. What does he tell this youth Sudhana? He says, even if the realm of space comes to an end, if the realm of beings comes to an end, if their karma and their afflictions come to an end, I will still accord endlessly and continuously in thought after thought without cease. My body, mouth, and mind never weary of these deeds. My sense is with this contemplation, you let go of time. You let go of space. You let go of any expectations that somehow you're going to finish your job. You just let go. And just moment to moment, we just give it all we've got. Our full spirit, our full effort. I'm not here hoping this will end. I'm not here hoping the living beings will somehow stop suffering and then I can get free. It's no, this is what my life's about. Just serving living beings without expectations, moment to moment, without any thought of tiring. And actually this is very liberating. You would think, oh my goodness, this is, first I would read this passage and go, my goodness, this is impossible. This is impossible. I'm going to have to just stick around forever? Maybe I should just, maybe it's easier just to turn on the YouTube and just watch TV, Forget about this Bodhisattva path because it's just too much work. But in fact, if you really reflect, right, we just let go of all expectations and just put our full effort, full heart into it. That's when we really have fun. What we do really becomes enjoyable. Because when we expect all these external rewards or some kind of thing to happen, that's when we start to have kind of internal kind of tension, because we need to have something happen for us to be okay. But if we can just be in the moment, completely at ease, not worrying, vigorous, engaged, everything's okay, no problem. We just that moment to moment to moment, right? So I think this is Samantabhadra's instructions to the youth Sudhana to say, this care, this service, this according with all living beings is done in this way right now, in this very moment of our moment of existence. You can say all the way to Buddhahood, to the end of time and end of space. It never ends. And so now go back to that person you thought of, whether it's a mom or a dad or a friend, and just think, if I were to stay with this person to the end of time, the end of space, until they become a Buddha, what would that mean? What skills would I need to cultivate? What kind of patience would I need to have? And can I have that kind of heart every moment for this living being? Now you can think of this living being. Of course, how about ourselves? Same for ourselves. We have to have that kind of heart, right? We need to stick with ourselves, not give up, and take care of ourselves moment to moment all the way to Buddhahood and beyond. And that same reflection is not just for that living being that we thought of, not just for ourselves, but for every single living being that we encounter in our lives. That's the heart that Samantabhadra Bodhisattva says we need to cultivate. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of the spirit, to me that's very inspiring as a kind of a pole star for myself. Am I there? No, for sure. I have resistment. Oh, I don't know about that. That's just too much work. And I start complaining in my mind. gosh, I have to do this meeting, I have to go to that meeting, I have this responsibility, and how come I have to do more than that person over there? And it's not fair. And that person kind of scolded me, and he didn't really understand the full situation. So, how could he scold me for that? And the mind just gets all this kind of the churning of the afflicted mind. But if we can remember Samantabhadra Bodhisattva's teachings here, we can realize, actually, that's the whole journey. Working with those afflictions and serving each of those afflictions till they wake up. That's the field of our work. Okay, so that's Samantabhadra Bodhisattva's kind of instructions to use Sudhana. And a little bit time left, I want to actually go over a section in the Mencius that I had went over in DRBU at the same time I was doing this text. And there's a very famous story here that Master often tells that I think probably people know. They say the foolish farmer of Song, right? People know that story where a farmer is raising his crops, and he's worried, my crops aren't growing fast enough. They're still, just tiny little buds coming out. And, I really hope they can grow faster. So he goes back home one day, and he's really tired. This is how Master Hall tells the story. And he's really tired. And his son asks him, "Oh, Dad, why are you so tired?" And Dad goes, "Because I worked all day today. I was helping the plants grow." And his son goes, "Wow, my dad is really smart. He knows how to help the plants grow. Everybody else, they have to wait. But my dad, he's really smart. He can help plants grow." So he runs out to the field to see how did his dad help the plants grow. And what do you see? All the plants dead. What did he find out? Because his dad, to help the plants grow, pulled up each of the plants an inch out of the ground, just to get it to grow a little bit faster. If I could just help you grow a little bit faster. Okay, next one. And what happened? All of them died. And this is Mencius saying how we as living beings oftentimes try to help the plants grow and don't know how to just let them grow, right? And so this is what I think about according with living beings is very much like this. Because according with living beings isn't to quote unquote help them grow in the way that I think they're supposed to grow. It's to actually really help them grow. That's why I said according with living beings. Right, according to living beings. So it's a really, I think, beautiful metaphor that comes from Chinese culture that's actually very, very profound. But this, just a little bit of time here, this comes from a section in the Mencius in book 2. In the book that I have is 2A2. And I'll just read a couple sections of it, just to give you a flavor, because I actually think it gives very precise instruction on self-cultivation that was actually quite inspired by. And so this section begins with somebody named, I don't know if my pronunciation is correct, Go Sun Zhou asked Mencius. He says, "Suppose, Master, you were appointed to be a high noble or prime minister in Qi, and were able to put the way into practice there. If that were so, it would not be surprising at all if the ruler of Qi were to become a Lord Protector or a genuine king. If it were like this, would it perturb your heart or not? Basically, would your heart have some anxiety or movement, right?" Mencius says what? "It would not. My heart has been unperturbed since I was 40. In our Buddhist language say, you have samadhi, 你有定力, right? Mencius says, my heart has not moved since I was 40. So this person asks, in that case, Master, you have far surpassed Mengbeng. And Mengzi says, it's not difficult. Gaozi had an unperturbed heart before I did. So then Gong Sun Zhou then asks, how do you cultivate this unperturbed heart, right? How do you have this samadhi? Is there a way of cultivating this unperturbed heart? Now, what I find very kind of interesting within kind of Chinese classics is that these passages really have you reflect. So Mengzi doesn't reply directly. So what he says, there is. As for Bo Guangyou's cultivation of courage, his body would not shrink, his eyes would not blink. He regarded the least slight from someone like being beaten in the marketplace. Insults he would not take off of a common fellow coarsely clad. He also would not take off of a ruler who could field 10,000 chariots. He looked upon running a sword through a ruler who could field 10,000 chariots as like running through a common fellow. He did not treat the various lords with deference. If an insult came his way, he had to return it. So what kind of unperturbed heart is this? This is the unperturbed heart of toughness, right? I'm scared of nobody. Whatever anything comes, I'm going to just, do it my way. It's like the cowboy unperturbed heart. It's like the kind of gangster unperturbed heart, the warrior unperturbed heart, right? So then he goes on. He says, as for Meng Shishe's cultivation of courage, he said, I look upon defeat as the same as victory. To advance only after sizing up one's enemy, to ponder whether one will achieve victory, and only then join battle. This is to be in awe of the opposing armies. How can I be certain of victory? I can only be without fear. So interesting. This is page 126. So here, Meng Shishe's way of cultivating courage, cultivating this unmoving heart, is saying, you know what? I won't have any fear in my heart. I can't control external conditions. Right? The first person just forced his will on external conditions. I just destroy everything in my path. I will take no insult. I'm strong. The second person's strength comes from where? Inside. I will have no fear. Right? So Mencius kind of goes on. I won't go through all of it just because of the time. But it's very interesting. The next one he says, I have once heard about great courage from the master. And who's the master? Confucius, right? Now, what is Confucius' way of having unperturbed heart? Is it the unperturbed heart of this kind of heroic courage that fights anything in its way? Or a courage that is fearless and has no fear? Actually, it's not. Here's Confucius's unmoved heart. He says, if I examine myself and am not upright, although I am opposed by a common fellow coarsely clad, would I not be in fear? If I examine myself and am upright, although I opposed by thousands and tens of thousands, I shall go forward. Interesting, right? So for Confucius, he reflects on himself, looks at his virtue, looks at his uprightness, his integrity, you could say. And if he realizes, if I'm not in integrity, then no matter what the situation is, I'm afraid. I'm deeply afraid. But if I find that I'm in integrity, then I can face anything in the world and have no fear. So where does Confucius put his unmoving heart? Is in his integrity, in his virtue. So it's very interesting. So you can see the kind of subtleties that Mencius is moving here in terms of response. He didn't actually say to him how to do this. He's just giving you examples. And then you have to explore, what kind of courage do we have? How do we hold our heart still? I don't have time to kind of read this whole section, but the next part is actually a very interesting description about qi, about how do you cultivate qi. And I said the principle is our intention directs the qi, and we actually don't want to mess up our qi. But I don't have time to go over that because I wanted just to point to this section here that I talked about, the story of this foolish farmer of Song. And that's on page 127. So he says here, one must work at it. And this, I think, is righteousness, you see above. But do not aim at it directly. Let the heart not forget, but do not help it grow. So this is Mencius' instruction on self-cultivation. Do not be like the man from Song. Among the people of the state of Song, there was one who, concerned lest his grain not grow, pulled on it. Wearily he returned home and said to his family, "Today I'm worn out. I helped the grain to grow." His son rushed out to look. The grain was withered. And then Mencius reflects, those in the world who do not help the grain to grow are few. Those who abandon it, thinking it will not help, are those who do not weed their grain. Those who help it grow are those who pull on the grain. Not only does this not help, but it even harms it. And I think this is actually a very helpful instruction how to accord with living beings, both in our own nature and also those around us. That oftentimes we want to help things grow. We want to get rid of our afflictions in the way that we think they're supposed to be gotten rid of. We want to help others wake up in the way that we think they're supposed to wake up. And here, Mencius says, that can often cause harm. What's much more skillful, and I think it's why you actually have this image of cultivation of this field, is that you actually support the growth of the plant so it can naturally grow. And oftentimes this is providing the context, the environment, so that this plant will grow on its own to be healthy and strong. So today we were talking about the residential retreat, and one of the men said, I realized that a lot of the programs, I learned more from the environment than the actual thing we did. I said, yeah, that's actually by design. Because honestly, I don't really know how each person is going to grow. I don't have a kind of pre-image in my mind that somebody's going to learn this and learn this and learn this and learn this, and then they're going to wake up. I might have some sense of how I hope to nurture people's heart of kindness and compassion and well-being. But I just have this trust by being exposed to the Dharma among noble friends in a monastic environment. The heart begins to open up. The Bodhi resolve begins to naturally grow. And oftentimes we don't even see it ourselves. Because when we want ourselves to grow, we already have a kind of a fixed idea on how we're supposed to grow. But we just let that go. Things start to blossom themselves. And so I think this is when we say also according with living beings is being impartial, right? We read that in the sutra text. Good man, you should understand these truths in this way. When one's mind is impartial towards all living beings, one can accomplish full and perfect great compassion. So this impartiality is to be able to look evenly out at living beings. You could say, quote unquote, externally, and quote unquote, internally. Internally being our afflictions. And not judging them, not having to have them be a different way, but because we have this heart of great compassion towards them and we care about them, they begin to transform naturally. Naturally. We don't have to help them grow. But this also means, and Mencius makes a point, doesn't mean that we don't weed the field, right? Doesn't mean we just let the afflictions just grow wildly. We still have to maintain the environment. So to me, the weeding is the precepts, is the vinaya, is our day-to-day practice. We need to clear the field moment to moment to moment to allow our inner goodness to naturally blossom, to say have the fruits of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so this section in the Mencius is actually definitely worth reading closely, because the next actually goes to speech, saying how, because Mencius really deeply understands this principle, at least this is my connection, because I think these classics aren't just randomly put together. My sense that it actually has a kind of a strand that holds it together. So with this deeper understanding of this context of the field, and not just always attaching to the content on wanting things to grow, Mencius is able to look deeper into what's actually happening. So he's actually able to look at what somebody says and see deeper intentions and mind of the person saying it. So on page 127, he says, if someone's expressions are one-sided, I know that by which they are deluded. So for instance, if somebody expresses biased views, or if I express biased views, right? I think somehow maybe some culture is better than another culture. So then immediately the mind detects, here's a delusion, right? If someone's expressions are excessive, they like to exaggerate, to kind of make things bigger than they actually are, and I have that tendency, I know that by which they're entangled, where they're attached, right? Because when we do that kind of action, when we say things in a way that makes it bigger than life, bigger than it actually is, it's because somewhere we're attached. So Mencius is able just to hear the word and then be able to go deeper into actually what's going on in the person. And he goes on here. And to me, this is when a really good farmer knows how to farm, right? Because they know what the plant needs. They know which weeds to remove. So if Mencius is helping somebody, a student, he says, I know how, just the way that they talk, I know where they're caught. So I can help them remove those weeds in their field to allow their natural goodness to grow. So I won't continue on in this passage, but I encourage you, if you're interested, to read the Mencius. There's a lot of very deep wisdom for how we can live our lives and how we can cultivate. And I think it's a very wonderful bridge to then go into the Avatamsaka Sutra that really deepens this kind of understanding of how do we accord with living beings. So maybe just share that much for this evening. I hope people can really spend this week. Thanksgiving is coming up, and I know people are going to be probably meeting with family. And this is a really good time to learn to accord with living beings and not get into any fights and kind of debates about, politics, the world and so on and so forth, but just to say, really, how can I serve my parents and my relatives and my friends' well-being? Because I know if I do that, I'll really make the Buddhas happy. And from that place, I will truly wake up. So wish you all well, and I hope, I'm not sure, I think next week we probably will still have our sutra lecture, so I hope you can join in. Okay, so maybe we can do dedication of merit. You can change the screen. In terms of announcements, I think Gold Sage will be having an Emperor Liang repentance starting, I think, on Saturday. And at Berkeley Monastery here, we'll be transmitting the 8 precepts for them on Monday morning at 8 a.m. So if you wish to join, you can find that information at the Gold Sage website. And after that, I believe in early December, we'll have an Amitabha session here at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. Do you know what days that is? The Saturday, Sunday, is it 4th, 5th, 6th? Saturday, Sunday, Monday? December? Right? Yeah, December 4th, 5th?
Saturday will be 4th.
4th, yeah. So December 4th, 5th, and 6th, we plan to do an Amitabha session. So if you wish to join us, no better way than to spend your time reciting the Buddha's name. Okay, let's dedicate merit. 我们现在回向功德。 May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to gain compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the three jewels. Okay, wish everyone a good evening.